And welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. Well, between the fight over the border wall and the administration's travel ban, the Trump White House has long vowed to crack down on illegal immigration.
And now the president is taking on the long-disputed concept of birthright citizenship. Amber Strong has the story.
Since day one,
we're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice.
Immigration has been a focus of the Trump White House.
Now the administration is setting its sights on the children of illegal immigrants born in the U.S.
Some legal scholars believe you can get rid of birthright citizenship without changing the Constitution.
With an executive order. You can definitely do it with an act of Congress, but now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order.
It goes back more than 150 years to the idea of birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment, and the notion a person born on American soil is a U.S. citizen.
And it was designed to deal with the problem of how we treat the African Americans who had very recently been slaves.
But there's debate about one particular phrase and who it applies to, subject to the jurisdiction thereof.
It's been clear from the beginning that certain people can be born in the United States without being subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and therefore not get citizenship. Diplomatic personnel are a classic example.
The president claims the U.S. is the only country to offer this kind of loophole. That simply isn't true. Our neighbors to the north and many South American countries do it too. But what is true? The U.S. would not become the first Western country to close the door on birthright citizenship, or at least put in a few restrictions. Closing that door, however, isn't so easy. House Speaker Ryan differed with the president, saying Republicans objected to President Obama's similar attempts to use executive order on immigration policy.
The president's ability to change the law through executive orders is pretty limited. We have a constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. What he's doing is forcing a court battle.
And then there's the moral dilemma. Even if you can, does it make it right?
In a statement to CBN News, National Latino Evangelical Coalition President Dr. Gabriel Salguero writes, "Any reversal of birthright citizenship runs contrary to our most cherished constitutional values. Jesus was clear. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. This includes native-born children of immigrants." Amber Strong, CBN News in Washington.
And for more, we are joined now by Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. Tom, good to see you. Your thoughts on the president's plans for this birthright executive order?
Well, it would be a dramatic change in policy, and one that I think is well worth considering, given the fact that illegal aliens present in the United States and wanting to come to the United States, it's a mighty incentive to get and remain here if your children born here are automatically granted citizenship. And it's an open question, and it's a debatable question whether the Constitution requires that. And it's good to see the president joining the battle.
Those who say the president does have the authority to do it are pointing to the 14th Amendment. Tom, what's your read of the 14th Amendment?
Well, look, those who support birthright citizenship say the 14th Amendment requires granting citizenship or naturalizing anyone born here in the United States. And those who oppose it say that's not what the 14th Amendment says. And each side points to Supreme Court opinions which vaguely or directly or indirectly talk about these issues. So whether there's an executive order or legislation that's passed, ultimately the Supreme Court is going to decide whether the 14th Amendment requires birthright citizenship because it's unclear as to that it does under Supreme Court precedent.
The legal challenges could send it all the way there. With the new 5-4 conservative makeup, how do you think the Supreme Court would rule on this?
I'd hope they'd follow the facts, the law, and history, and recognize that the Constitution did not require that anyone born in the United States is automatically granted citizenship. On the other hand, it makes it pretty darn easy to figure out who's a citizen and who's not, as opposed to trying to figure out where one is born to grant in order to be able to get the benefits of citizenship and be granted citizenship. But given the current crisis of illegal immigration and the powerful incentive birthright citizenship gives to illegal aliens to come here, I think we just have to be very direct in asking questions as to whether or not birthright citizenship is a bridge too far in terms of benefits to illegal aliens.
Yeah, and just the logistics of this, Tom, a little bit of the timeline. You know, when might the president do this? And if he does sign it, what could be done to undo it other than another president signing another executive order?
Well, the courts could overturn the executive order. I'm not sure what the timing would be, but you can bet there'll be challenges legally to it. And of course, Congress could pass legislation, which would be much more difficult, it would seem to me, to challenge legally. But in the end, the Supreme Court's going to try to figure this out. And I think that's the important takeaway here. Whether or not the executive order is implemented or Congress passes legislation or not, we may have the Supreme Court having to figure out whether the Constitution requires giving illegal aliens the right to have their children granted citizenship for those born here.
Yeah. All right, Tom Fitton with Judicial Watch. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, the U.S. military is increasing the number of soldiers being sent to the southern border. 5,200 active duty troops have been ordered to deploy ahead of the approaching migrant caravan. The Defense Department says all troops would be there by the end of the week. The additional troops will join the more than 2,000 members of the National Guard already providing assistance at the border now. Officials say the troops will be armed and provide, quote, mission-enhancing capabilities.
President Trump touched down in Pittsburgh today in the wake of the synagogue massacre. This is the first funerals were held for the 11 victims who were gunned down while praying. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now from the North Lawn. Ben?
Jenna, President Trump is taking on the role as the consoler-in-chief today, touching down in Pennsylvania to show support for his city grieving. President Trump was joined by First Lady Melania Trump, and we're told that his daughter Ivanka Trump and son-in-law Jared Kushner will also be joining them in Pennsylvania. While in Pittsburgh, the commander-in-chief plans to meet with first responders and then visit the hospital to check in on the officers and survivors of the shooting. He'll also meet with the victims' family and friends, but not everyone is happy about the president's trip. Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto did ask Trump to postpone his visit until the community finished mourning. He will not be meeting the first family on the tarmac as he'll be attending one of the funerals. Services will be held today for some of the people gunned down at the Tree of Life Synagogue. As for the alleged gunman, 46-year-old Robert Bowers, he is behind bars charged with 29 federal counts, including hate crimes. If convicted, he could face the death penalty. Bowers will be back in court Thursday for a hearing. Well, that's the latest from the White House. Ben Kennedy, CBN News.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
Well, joining us now is CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody, who brings a unique perspective. David, you grew up Jewish in a synagogue. Can you walk us through what the members of that synagogue experienced as they were there at Saturday morning Shabbat services, based on your experience growing up in synagogue?
You bet. I mean, it's about a 3-hour service or so typically, and they start around 8:39 in the morning, and it's a real quiet affair. It's pretty solemn. I mean, unlike a church service, especially a charismatic church service, I mean, it's much more controlled, and there's a Torah reading, and there's, whether at this situation there was a baby bris going on, and so there's just different readings that are happening. So it's just a very calm experience, and you know, it's interesting because there's just a lot of folks that just want to kind of just sit down and take it all in. It's not any sort of like big energetic experience whatsoever.
David, we know a community is a huge part of the Jewish culture. In terms of how does community factor into this with how the Jewish community is dealing with this?
You know, the Jewish community has been very insular. That's how they've been through so much since the beginning of time, obviously, since Bible days, and go all the way up through the Holocaust, and obviously what's going on in Pittsburgh, and even before that. Anti-Semitism has been around for a very long time, and the way the Jewish people deal with it is, as I say, go insular. They're a very tight-knit community. They're very, they kind of rely on each other, and they also use humor very much so in these situations. Obviously, we're not seeing humor in the days after this, but the point is that the way they cope, their coping mechanism is humor. That's why you see the Jerry Seinfelds of the world, and Mel Brooks, and I can go on, but there's just so many different comedians, and that's how Jewish people have dealt a lot with the sorrow that's gone on in their lives.
David, we only have about a minute left, but there's a lot of talk now of armed security guards at synagogues. Even President Trump mentioned it. What's been your experience? What have you seen when you've been to different synagogues?
So I was bar mitzvahed in 1978, and so that was what, I don't want to do the math, but it's been a while. And back then, there were really no security guards whatsoever. Now, I just visited just about a year ago to Temple Emmanuel in New York City, and there were security guards there. They weren't armed, but there were security guards. So is the next step armed guards? We'll see. But I can tell you that there seems to be some sort of guard or police presence at certain temples in certain places, depending on the neighborhood and depending on what's been happening from an anti-Semitic standpoint. So it just depends. And we'll see if President Trump has any luck in any of this.
All right, David, thank you so much.
You bet, guys.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Well, Israeli leaders are offering words of comfort to American Jews following the weekend massacre in Pittsburgh. Their message during this tough time? We must fight anti-Semitism. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us that story from Jerusalem.
Jerusalem lit up the old city walls with American and Israeli flags in support of American Jewry after 11 Jews were murdered during morning prayers at a Pittsburgh synagogue.
I feel your pain today, and with me is the entire Jewish people. It is hard for us to believe, hard for us to understand how hatred and evil rose up to damage and to uproot the tree of life.
Israeli President Reuven Rivlin sent a taped message to an interfaith memorial service on Sunday. It was the worst attack against the Jewish community in U.S. history.
We must say loud and clear, this was an attack of anti-Semitism. Our brothers and sisters, friends and family were murdered because they were Jews.
At least 2,000 mourners packed the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall in Pittsburgh and stood to recite the Jewish mourners' prayer with Rivlin. Israel sent Government Minister Naftali Bennett to Pittsburgh to console the community shortly after the attack. Bennett also addressed the crowd and told them that hating Jews is not a distant memory. From Sderot to Pittsburgh, the hand that fires missiles is the same hand that shoots worshipers. We will fight against the hatred of Jews and anti-Semitism wherever it raises its head, and we will prevail. Uncharacteristically, the governments of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar all made statements condemning the attack, and even the Palestinian Authority referred to it as an act of terrorism. Back home, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and cabinet ministers opened their weekly meeting with a minute of silence. Netanyahu issued a call for the whole world to unite to fight anti-Semitism in every form.
We must stand and fight back against all these fronts, against this zealous, brutal anti-Semitism, which starts with Jews and never ends with Jews.
Shortly after the attack, Netanyahu released a video in English summing up the sentiments of Israel.
The entire people of Israel grieve with the families of the dead. We stand together with the Jewish community of Pittsburgh. We stand together with the American people in the face of this horrendous anti-Semitic brutality. And we all pray for the speedy recovery of the wounded.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, 1 week until Election Day, we're on the ground in battleground West Virginia. We are just 1 week away from the midterm elections. And in West Virginia, well-known Democratic Senator Joe Manchin is facing a serious challenge by the state's Republican Attorney General.
And as Jennifer Wishon reports, if the incumbent was any Democrat other than Manchin, the Republican would likely win.
Over the past 20 years, the Mountaineer state has done a political somersault, flipping from deep blue to reliably red. Its entire congressional delegation is Republican, except for its senior senator, Democrat Joe Manchin, who's facing a challenge from State Attorney General Patrick Morrisey. He's West Virginia's first Republican AG in nearly 80 years. As a Senate candidate, he's taking full advantage of enthusiasm for President Trump, who won the state with nearly 70% of the vote.
Pro-life, pro-gun, pro-coal, pro-Trump.
I'm Patrick Morrisey, and I'm your conservative fighter.
And in this new red state, he's painting his opponent as out of touch.
Liberal Joe's got to go. Amen, brothers.
Manchin is playing a trump card too, reminding voters that he chooses West Virginia over party, like his well-timed vote to confirm Justice Kavanaugh.
I'm Joe Manchin, and I approve this message. because for me, all roads lead to West Virginia.
And he's not letting the loss of the NRA's endorsement to Morrissey stop him from showing off his gun rights bona fides.
Now the threat is Patrick Morrissey's lawsuit to take away health care from people with pre-existing conditions. He is just dead wrong.
Pro-life groups are taking aim at Manchin for his lukewarm support for life. The Senate race coincides with a constitutional amendment that clarifies West Virginia neither secures nor protects the right to abortion. Here at the Romney Diner, voters are quick to share who they're supporting.
I'm going to vote for Morrissey.
For Gary Seville, it's simple. He's happy with President Trump and wants to send him a solid soldier.
That's what I want to see. Somebody will support him.
Quite frankly, Joe's the guy that needs to be in Washington.
Nicholson appreciates Manchin's willingness to cross the aisle and vote with Republicans.
Vote with your heart, not with your party. You've got to go on your own gut belief and your research to make a decision. And yes, more people need to go across the aisle. There's no doubt about it.
Bill McDonald supported Manchin in the past, but he's voting for Morrissey. Look no farther than President Obama's energy policies, he says, to understand why so many West Virginians have switched parties.
We're proud, and we will not allow people to close our coal mines and to inundate us with opioids, okay, and take away our livelihood, and then they want to continue doing that, and they don't ever want to stop, they want to give up because of clean energy.
Morrissey took Obama's clean energy plan to the Supreme Court and won. Donna Hawk voted early, and for her, the answer was easy.
Manchin.
But she says the real solution to the problems here and the nation don't require an election.
We need to get back to God. They took God out of schools, kids went haywire. You know, and we need that spiritual base. The spiritual base is the only thing that can fight the evilness.
If Manchin wins, he'll remain a sought-after swing vote. If Morrissey pulls off a victory, it will be huge for West Virginia Republicans and President Trump. Reporting from the Windy Mountains of West Virginia, Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. And David Brody joins us once again. David, a lot of talk about West Virginia, Joe Manchin. The one thing that he may have going for him is Brett Kavanaugh.
Brett Kavanaugh, and that's something that John Tester in Montana doesn't have, another red state, Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, and Joe Donnelly in Indiana. We've talked about it. How will they do compared to Manchin? And look, Manchin is the former governor, and he's a guy that, as they would say in West Virginia, is packing heat. You know, I mean, he's a guy that is pro-Second Amendment. A lot of Republicans are saying, why aren't you a Republican? And so he seems to fit the mold very well in West Virginia, and I think Jennifer hit the nail on the head.
Well, there was even talk at one point, right, that he might switch to the Republican Party, but that never happened.
No, right, it never happened.
Yeah.
We'll see what the numbers look like right after the midterms to see if he will switch.
Speaking of numbers, we're exactly 1 week away from Election Day, midterm elections. I know you were on yesterday talking about some of the tight races that you were looking at. Are you seeing any of these races tightening as we're getting closer?
There's a couple that are very, very interesting. Two that haven't been on the radar all that much, and yet in the last week or so they've really tightened. In New Jersey, Bob Menendez, and Jenna was pointing this out in the newsroom. You know, she was one of the first to report it, you know, about how Menendez really could lose here. This is obviously, he's got corruption written all over this campaign.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's really the number one issue in that campaign. And so now it's within the margin of error. So that's one race. And then John James. And we've talked a little bit about him in Michigan. Debbie Stabenow, a three-term incumbent there, she was up by 16 points about 3 weeks ago, or about a month ago or so. Now it's down to about 6 points, which is in striking distance for John James. And he's, of course, an Army veteran, captain in the Army, runs a multi-million-dollar company. So those are two races that are now really on the board that weren't before.
What's causing that tightening in Michigan, do you think?
A couple different things. John James is a really good candidate, and I think that's really important. And Debbie Stabenow, once again, when you're an incumbent and you've been around D.C. for so long and you're trying to, quote, drain the swamp, and that narrative sinks in,
you become part of the swamp.
Debbie Stabenow is feeling that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the House a little bit. President Trump, he was down in North Carolina this week, stumping for House candidates there. There are no Senate or gubernatorial races there. Really interesting. One candidate, Mark Harris, a former pastor. Talk about that. He's kind of faced a lot of backlash for some of his sermons, actually.
Yeah, he had a sermon on biblical womanhood. And of course, in this day and age, in the political correctness, that didn't go over well with definitely a lot of the liberal activists who were saying that it's too traditional an approach basically. And so he actually dropped quite a bit in the polls because of that. He's now rebounded. It is a toss-up race, and so we're going to see what happens. It's the 9th district down in that Charlotte area. So that is a big-time bellwether because the way that race goes, that many House races around the country could go as well.
And we saw President Trump campaigning for Mark Harris and another congressman in the Charlotte area last week. He's busy on the campaign trail. I think 11 campaign stops this week. How is that affecting the race? Is he helping these candidates? Is he motivating voters to get out and vote?
100%. I mean, this is when we talked about it's like 2016 again. This is 2016. I mean, I have it here. He's doing 11 rallies in 8 states starting on Halloween. How appropriate it's Halloween. And if you look down on some of these cities that he's going to, 2 in Missouri he's doing. I mean, look at this. He's doing 2 in Missouri, 2 in Indiana, and 2 in Florida. That should tell you everything. Missouri, Claire McCaskill, Josh Hawley. That's important to the White House. Indiana, Joe Donnelly. And Florida, big governor's race, big Senate race. The Senate race, Bill Nelson, Rick Scott. So this is where the White House is putting the time and effort, and that means those are the races that they're most concerned about, but also think are winnable at this stage.
Yeah, we'll see how much it pays off.
Yep.
All right, David, thank you.
Thanks,
David. Still ahead, why one Colorado baker once again finds himself fighting for religious freedom.
Watch live election coverage on the CBN News Channel, Tuesday, November 6th from 8 p.m. to midnight.
Well, Colorado is once again going after masterpiece cake shop baker Jack Phillips. This time it's for refusing to bake a cake to mark a transgender person's changing from male to female.
That's right, Jenna. Now Phillips is suing the state. Paul Strand explains why his battle in Colorado could affect Christians elsewhere.
Baker Jack Phillips, all he wants to do is make cakes. But it seems all Colorado wants to do is make trouble for Jack.
The state agency acting against Phillips lost here at the U.S. Supreme Court, with justices specifically blasting it for hostility toward Phillips' religious beliefs. Now the Colorado Civil Rights Commission is going after the Christian baker again, this time for refusing a transgender celebration cake.
At this point, they're just targeting Christians. This is outright Christian persecution.
This time around, though, constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis believes the commission will be more subtle.
The masterpiece decision was very particular to the commission to say you cannot be overtly hostile. So now what they're doing is they're just going to say, well, we won't be as obvious about our hostility, but we still want to go after Jack.
Meanwhile, Phillips and his lawyers are going on offense by suing the Colorado bureaucrats.
They are actually striking back and saying, this is just outright persecution. You're not interested in stopping discrimination. You're interested in hunting Christians down.
If Christians are always only on the defensive, then we're going to continue to lose ground eventually. We have to be also making sure that we're standing up and we're standing forward.
Ellis and Hunt warned people of faith should be deeply concerned about their religious freedom, given some of today's leaders and officials.
Even after the Colorado Civil Rights Commission heard from the U.S. Supreme Court in a 7-2 decision, including Obama appointees telling them to stop targeting people of faith, the government essentially ignored it.
And this is about whether or not the government can compel you or me to say something and to embrace and celebrate messages that go against our sincerely held religious beliefs.
Jack Phillips is very much a canary in the coal mine with regards to the very legal issues, very important legal issues that we're going to be facing.
So why care about this one baker and his little masterpiece cake shop in a suburb of Denver? Because if you hold certain beliefs and you're a Christian, you could be the next Jack Phillips. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Paul makes a really great point. You know, this is not going away anytime soon, and with so much, so much conflict in our culture, a lot of cases, whatever the issue is, are going to go to the courts.
That's right. We'll have to wait and see how the courts play it all out.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to do it for today's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.